I'm David Ashford and I'm a member for Douglas North.
Why are you seeking re-election?
It's been a very challenging 5 years, and I think the next 5 years are going to be just as challenging, and I want to be part of facing those challenges. The last 5 years have all been really around international challenges, from things such as VAT renegotiation, beneficial ownership, Brexit, and we mustn't forget, of course, the worldwide pandemic. But I think the challenges over the next 5 years are going to come domestically in ensuring that we have an economy that is actually fit for purpose, ensuring that it's a diverse economy, and ensuring that we can get affordable housing for young people and reform of the planning system and the benefits system. Those are big challenges, and I believe that the experience I've managed to muster over the last 5 years and also the 8.5 years prior to that as a Douglas councillor put me in good stead to be able to represent the people of the Isle of Man.
Now, for more than half of the 5-year term, you have been serving as a minister. How has that impacted your ability to represent Douglas North?
I've got to be honest, it has been a balancing act, particularly because the ministership I've taken on is health and social care, which is known as one of the bigger departments. And of course, I've been Minister for Health and Social Care in a worldwide pandemic. But I've enjoyed representing constituents. I've got to say some of my best moments as an MHK have actually been able to solve problems for constituents, because although in the scheme of things, people may see their problems as minor or as not as important, they actually are. For that person, that problem at that moment in time can sometimes be the centre of their lives. So getting it resolved and actually seeing the look on the person's face when that problem is resolved is actually the most amazing thing.
Early on in your term, you were quite vocal as a backbencher. You asked a lot of questions in Keys and in Tynwald. Did you ever think about not accepting that minister role because it has hindered your ability to do that?
No, I didn't. I take on challenges. I've never been one to turn down a challenge, and health and social care, let's be honest, was a challenge. It still is a challenge in a worldwide pandemic. But no, I didn't consider for 1 minute not accepting the role. I think if you're asked to do something in politics, then you shouldn't shy away from it. And I've never been one to run away from a challenge. In terms of questioning and everything else, of course, what it does do being a minister is gives me a seat at the decision-making table in Council of Ministers, and I can assure people, and I'm sure my colleagues will testify, I'm just as forceful in Council of Ministers as I was as a backbencher.
Now, one of the biggest challenges in health, of course, is budget. A couple of times you did have to come back to Tynwald, ask for additional budgeting. Was it disappointing that you weren't able to get that spend under control?
It was, but last year, of course, we didn't have to come back for a supplementary vote. We actually stayed within the budget that was allocated to us. And currently, so far in this financial year, we are also again within our budget that's been allocated. It was going to take several years, and I laid that out quite bluntly, I think, in my very first time as minister when I had to come back for supplementary monies to say that we needed to ensure that we had the right changes in place, and that was going to take time. It took several years to do. It was frustrating to have to do that for 3 years, coming back for additional monies. But when it comes to something like health, it's important that the department was resourced appropriately.
You've also overseen the establishment of Manx Care in your time as Health Minister. Does that remove some responsibility from you, taking healthcare away from that political side of things? Is it almost a passing the buck thing now?
Well, actually, to play on that phrase, the buck stops here. It stops here with me ultimately as minister. Although I'm still responsible for what goes on in the health services. Again, that's something I've made clear in Tynwald. There's no running away and saying that's Manx Care's problem. A problem for Manx Care is also a problem for DHSC, and DHSC and Manx Care need to work together. And that's going to be the key to this, and making sure it works is that close relationship between Manx Care and DHSC, and myself as Minister and the Chair of Manx Care.
Of course, part of the role of Health Minister, you've been very much involved in the handling of the pandemic. How would you rate your response to the pandemic?
I think it's too early to do that, to be perfectly honest. I think, we have to get to the end of the pandemic first. And, I don't think it's for me to rate how I've actually done. I think that's for others to rate. And we have an election coming up in September where I'm sure the people of Douglas North will decide whether or not they believe I've done an adequate enough job to represent them for the next 5 years, or whether they decide they want to change. And ultimately it's the electorate that makes that verdict, not us politicians.
Do you have any regrets, though? There were concerns ahead of the third lockdown that perhaps government didn't step in soon enough. There were issues around genomics testing, around the steam packet. Do you regret anything there?
I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing. And, if I look back, I think one of the things I do regret is that perhaps in terms of the steam packet, we didn't act quick enough. In terms of, but we had to go on the evidence that was there at the time. Like I say, hindsight, as I've always said, is one of those wonderful things that make people look highly intelligent after the fact. But we had to go based on the evidence that was there then. If we had the evidence that we do now, particularly around how vaccination works, then I think the decisions would have been very, very different.
In 2016, when you were elected, you gave an interview to Manx Radio where you said that for the next 5 years it has to be about policy, not personality. Now, through the briefings, you have become something of a personality. Do you still stand by that statement?
I do indeed. I don't think it's very helpful when people focus on people's personalities. That conversation, which I think was with James Davies when he was doing the interview with me, that was in relation to some of the personalities that were in Keys at the time, where it was becoming more about personal warfare, I felt at that time, between certain individuals than about debating policy. I think one of the things I would praise all of my colleagues in the House of Keys for in the last 5 years is I think it has become more about policy. And while we may disagree on policy quite viciously sometimes, personalities haven't come into it. It hasn't become personal. It's been around policies and we've stuck to that.
Now, ahead of the island's first lockdown, I actually spoke to you on the 13th of March last year when we spoke about the TT, and I think you told me that there was no rush, it was still a fair way off, and then on the 16th of March it was cancelled. So was there an element of unpreparedness ahead of that first lockdown, or did things really change that quickly?
No, things did change. In fact, in those early days, things were changing on an hourly basis, let alone a daily basis. There had been discussions around TT, but no firm decision had been made. The situation in the UK changed quite rapidly during that March period, and particularly that week, in fact, if you actually go back and look at the figures of the UK. And that was also just before we got our first case on the Isle of Man, of course, which then changed things dramatically for us.
I've been looking back through your 2016 manifesto. You highlight A&E waiting times as a priority, something you wanted to see reduced. You've probably had the best opportunity of anyone to tackle that, have you?
So in terms of A&E waiting times, they did come down. They have gone back up again during the pandemic period. For a while, we actually got the throughput through A&E down quite dramatically, which was around about 2 years, just under 2 years ago. Frustratingly, they have risen again, but again, I know it's a priority of Manx Care and the department to try and get them down. In terms of my manifesto, as you'll have seen reading through it, I'd say a good 70% of it I've actually delivered on.
You also raised over 70s TV licences as an issue you wanted to see tackled. That's not really been too far from the agenda at all over the last 5 years, and there still seems to be no long-term solution there. Why is that?
Well, actually, that was one that was resolved. I pledged in my manifesto that I would bring to the first sitting of Tynwald a motion for the over 70s free TV licence to be restored. I did exactly that at my first sitting at Tynwald. That motion was approved unanimously, if I remember correctly, and so people over 70s have been getting their free TV licence. While there's still negotiations going on with the UK, and the BBC, of course, has changed the goalposts as well over the time by actually saying they won't actually fund it. So those are still ongoing, but at the moment, Isle of Man government, as per the motion and as per my manifesto, is paying for those free TV licences.
You also raised concerns about the infrastructure around Douglas North, in particular calling for improvements to roads and pavements. What progress have you made there?
So Johnny Watterson's has been done. In fact, Johnny Watterson's has been done twice, I think, in the time. There's been work infrastructure in Glen Park as well. There is also infrastructure works that are being scheduled in Cronkerberry and Tremode. There's still an awful lot of work to be done up there. There's been some works around Governor's Hill, which is the part of the constituency I live in as well. But, there needs to be much more investment. I think sometimes it's forgotten just how heavy the traffic around Douglas North can actually be, and the Tremode Road proposals, I've got to say, are interesting. There's some bits I agree with, there's some bits I don't, but I'll save that up for another time.
Looking ahead then, we asked you ahead of this interview for your main priorities. We gave you a selection, or you could have added your own. You picked affordable housing, economic diversification and planning reform. Why not health?
I think in health we are in a better position than we are. I mean, I could actually, to be perfectly honest, have picked about 12, but you limited me to 3. And I think 3 of the things that are absolutely crucial to do is with planning. I've always been very firm of the fact it should be one area plan for the Isle of Man. We have 4 area plans on a regional basis that sometimes are done years apart, and I just don't believe it's joined up enough. And also, as we move on the climate change agenda, we need to ensure that the planning system incentivises that, and it offers support for those to be, that we don't end up with a 2-tier society, that those that can afford to make adaptations and changes to their home to make it more efficient and benefit can do so, but those that can't afford it are left behind. And I think that's why that is such a crucial policy. In terms of health, I think we are in a much better place than we were. There are issues around waiting lists that need to be tackled, as there always is in health. But I think in terms of the high-level strategic priorities over the next couple of years, those are the ones I think need absolutely urgently addressing.
Concerns over affordable housing, particularly for the young, though, those aren't new issues. Why is that not something that's been fixed in the last 5 years?
Well, I think it's become more pronounced in the last couple of years, and we're seeing house prices rise at a much greater rate than we have in the past. The first-time buyers schemes, to be perfectly frank, were fit for their time. I don't think they are now. I think it needs to be a fundamental top-down review, and we need to look further than just the UK as well. We need to look at what other areas of the world are doing in this regard. And I think there's some very good schemes out there that the island can mirror.
With the economic diversification as well, what does the island need to be looking at there? In what ways can it diversify the economy?
It's a very big global world, and one of the things the island has the opportunity to do is form part of the international trade deals that the UK is taking part in with Brexit. One of the concerns I have is we are very reliant on the UK marketplace in terms of our economy. So when there's shocks to the UK economy, it tends to have a shock impact on us. We need to be diversifying and going out into the world and showing that the Isle of Man is an attractive place to do business, not just if you're in the UK, but also wider afield. And I think, the fact the Isle of Man can take part in those Brexit trade deals if we wish to, where the UK has negotiated that, I think we should be grabbing that with both hands and showing the wider world we're open for business.
Do you think enough has been done in the last few years since Brexit to put the Isle of Man out there like that?
I think we've been trying, but of course we've had other challenges. Brexit used to be the big word. It used to be the thing we were all coming up here to do interviews about, and then suddenly COVID hit. And suddenly it became all about COVID. So Brexit suddenly paled a bit into insignificance compared to the worldwide pandemic. But I think that the Department for Enterprise has been working exceptionally hard on this. But I think there needs to be more attention put. And the way that the island has handled COVID in the early days of the pandemic, getting us to this point where we're now looking to live with COVID, is something that's got international recognition. That has been reported in media across the world, and I think we should be using that to advertise the island as a great place to live and work and also do business.
Well, the other one of your priorities was planning reform. What is it about that needs to change?
So in terms of planning, as I say, with the area plans, I believe there should be one area plan for the island. I think doing different area plans in different regions years and years apart doesn't work. There needs to be an overhaul of the strategic plan just to check it's still fit for purpose. And as I say, in relation to climate change, the planning system is going to be absolutely crucial as part of that climate change agenda. And we've got to ensure that the schemes that are in place benefit everyone in society, that we don't end up with a 2-tier climate change society of those that can afford to do adaptations and afford to change and those that can't being left behind.
So the area plan for the East, for example, that was quite recently approved in Tynwald, was it not? Did you not agree with that?
No, so I thought in terms of the area plan with the East, there were certain individual parts, as a Douglas MHK, I didn't agree with, but you've got to vote on the plan as a whole. I could have voted against the entire plan, but I thought overall the plan was decent. But there were certainly individual elements, and I think there was other members as well who felt there were certain individual elements that didn't work. But doing this by area, what it does is it doesn't give a joined up opinion, because you might have an area plan for the south that was done, say, several years ago. And then you're producing a new area plan for the east that then in some ways has to tie out, because there's not great boundaries and barriers between the different areas of the island. So with the size that we are, we should be doing one area plan that covers everywhere.
So which parts didn't you agree with?
So in relation to some of the sites that had been allocated for housing, and also some of the decisions around certain roads, should those sites be used, as to where link roads would be fitted in, and also around the potential for demand on the hospital as well, as Minister for Health and Social Care, should some of those developments see fruition.
You mentioned in your 2016 manifesto that you won't achieve everything on there in 5 years. You estimate that you've done about 70%. What is your biggest regret from that remaining 30% that you haven't been able to do?
So one of the things I would have liked to see is a fundamental review of the benefits system. The benefits system has been added to for years and years. And I think it's very complicated for people to get round what are they actually entitled to. And there's also procedural things as well. So, for instance, disability living allowance, people who may be on it for life because their conditions are never going to improve, when they have to reapply for it, they have to complete the whole form again. And for anyone who hasn't dealt with these forms, they're booklets, basically. They're about 32-page booklets. So rather than simply an assessment of them by a medical professional to say their condition hasn't changed and there's no change from the previous application, they've got to go through the process again. And one of the things I've found as a constituent MHK is that is absolutely emotionally draining for people. The number of times I've had to sit down with people and go through that process and try and get them over it because they can't do it themselves or they haven't got the support to do it themselves is actually been concerning to me.
Looking ahead to the next administration then, where do you see yourself fitting into that? Would you want to serve as a minister again? Would you want perhaps the same role?
Well, first of all, it's up to the people of Douglas North whether they want me again. After 5 years, the people of Douglas North might decide they want to change and move on to someone else. If I was re-elected, again, that would be up to whoever is the new Chief Minister. I would be happy to continue as a minister. Where would be, as I say, entirely up to the Chief Minister. I'm not afraid of a challenge. I'd take it on. And equally, if the new Chief Minister didn't want me as a minister, I'd be quite happy as a backbencher as well. I think I showed that I'm quite capable of scrutiny during my time as a backbencher.
Would you want to throw your own hat in the ring as Chief Minister?
Right, we will categorically put this to bed now. Not often straight answer from a politician, but you'll get a straight answer now, and that is I will not be a candidate for the Chief Ministership should I be re-elected.
Why not?
My family is a young family and they're about to go into the teenage years, but also I think we've got very good candidates who could come forward and take on that role.
So we've touched on some of them already, what are the main priorities for the government in the next 5 years? At this time, 5 years from now, what do we need to be talking about as having been achieved? So
what we need to do is that 5 years, as I say, this 5 years has been taken by international events. I really believe the next 5 years are going to be driven by the social agenda. We need to build on what we've seen through the pandemic of the cohesiveness of society, where society actually grouped together as an island and as a community we did things, we achieved things, and we need to harness that community spirit to deliver on the needs and priorities of people on the island. And that goes back to things like affordable housing for young people, ensuring that the island is an attractive place for businesses to set up and create jobs, and drive forward the economy, and ensuring that we have, I'm going to stray outside of the priorities I gave now, but also ensure that we have a world-beating education system, and also that the changes that have taken place in health continue to embed to ensure that patients are at the heart of everything that we do.
So if someone does vote for you, what can you promise them?
So I can promise that I will be a very strong, enthusiastic representative. I have fought hard for constituents in Douglas North over the last 5 years, and I would continue to do so. I don't win every argument, no politician does, and any candidate that comes to someone and says I will achieve everything and I will win every battle, I think it should be taken with a pinch of salt, to be perfectly frank. But I will promise people that I will work hard and I will fight for them. They will see in my manifesto what I will be fighting for. Once I've decided to fight for something, I will do so. I don't change my mind in that sense. If people vote for me, they'll know from the manifesto what they're going to get.